We are 7 days into the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, and everyone, including journalists, can attest to the uniqueness of these pandemic games, which are being held under a state of emergency, having to navigate very strict restrictions. Some journalists spoke to me about their experiences so far.
It's been very good. It's very difficult to work with all the restrictions. I have been covering sports for 14 years, but this is my first ever Olympics, so I was very excited to be here. But at the same time, it is unlike any other multi-sport event that I have ever seen because there are lots of rules to follow and social distancing and everything. But the fact that games are happening and we all are here is something that makes me very happy because a year ago it seemed like this is not going to happen.
It's been a really interesting experience so far, especially even the run up to being able to get here. We had to fill out so much paperwork, we had to have activity plans approved, we weren't getting a lot of information back from the Japanese government. I wasn't sure I was even going to get into the country, right? And then once I got here, it's been very complicated. There's been a lot of restrictions that we haven't faced in the past. Obviously, we're all wearing masks, but we can't move freely about to different venues and different events. We're supposed to book things in advance, which is very different. You know, we're not supposed to go out to dinner or to see the city, which is awful because this is a wonderful city. We're all under kind of a soft quarantine for the first 2 weeks. So it's a really different experience.
From a transportation point of view, I think the fact that we could not use, that we still cannot use, at least as far as I'm concerned, we still cannot use public transport is a big minus, because obviously these Olympics were thought with public transport in mind. So having to use only transport media shuttles, it makes things more complicated. It takes longer. But I mean, this is a small price to pay for actually being here, because for a very long time we didn't know if this was actually going to take place.
Yeah, it's much more difficult to get in touch with athletes. Some of the American teams are doing Zoom access, like the soccer teams and the basketball teams, so we can get to them by video. But at the actual events, in the mixed zones, which is where we usually talk to athletes, they're restricting how many people can go in and how many people from each country can go in. It's very restrictive. So it's not the kind of access that we're used to. I've talked to a lot of athletes on the phone instead of in person. I've relied on my colleagues. You know, luckily reporters are kind to each other and they share their files, their audio files, if they're in the mixed zone and other people are not able to get in. So, you know, we're kind of making do, but it's definitely a challenge.
I think the biggest challenge has been to to get to the athletes and speak with them. Of course, we can't go physically, but because of the changes in rules and everything, it is even more difficult to interact with anybody. Of course, there are copyright rules, and like rights holders have their own rules in place as well. But if you keep that aside, this is an Olympic which is unlike any other. So what has happened is there is very limited interaction that we can have with the athletes. So it's very difficult to know what is happening and what is going on. That is one thing which I think everybody is struggling with.
As part of the COVID-19 countermeasures in place to ensure a safe and secure games, the Tokyo 2020 organizers introduced an advanced venue booking system for press to limit the number of journalists and photographers at each competition venue so as to ensure social distancing is duly observed. The booking system is not for high-demand events such as gymnastics, swimming, and athletics, which are ticketed by the IOC ticketing desk and NOCs.
You know, it has worked okay. I don't know how it's working for them because I think a lot of people are booking many events at the same time because they're not sure where they're going to go. This is a news event, and so, for example, Simone Biles withdrew from the Olympics. That was a giant news event, and normally people would try to get over there right away, and you can't. You can't do that under those circumstances. I think it's difficult to try and know where you're going to be 24 or 48 hours in advance because you can have a plan, but at the Olympics, plans always go out the window.
We need to make reservations depending on where we want to go. I have noticed that different venues deal with it in a different way. Some of them are very strict. Some others probably not that much because probably they see that there is availability and maybe there are very big press rooms and very big press stands and there aren't very many people there, so they allow people to go in even if they haven't booked at times. But yeah, we need to follow this procedure. Obviously, it's a departure from what we used to do, because we used to change our mind like this and then decide to go to one place instead of another, and also depending on what was happening with the competitions. Because if there was a competitor from one nation that was in a medal position, then you would decide to go to a certain place on a whim. Now it's more complicated to do that. Also, here in Tokyo, there are a lot more high-demand events than there were in Rio 5 years ago. It's not 4. It poses a lot of constraints that in normal situations, in a normal situation, let's call it in a COVID-free world, it would not be necessary. I mean, maybe I don't see all the facets, all the aspects of it. So maybe there are some positives that the organization can draw from having a booking system, but not being able to change your mind quickly and go and follow the medals and follow the athletes and follow the stories, it's a big limitation for doing what we do, because then you end up having to watch on TV and it's the same thing that happens everywhere around the world, and there's no point in being here.